Hey everybody, this is the third section of Chapter 3 of Charles Bettelheim's Class Struggles in the USSR, third period 1930 to 1941, Part 1, The Dominated. Chapter 3 again is titled The Kolkhoz System, and the section that we're going to be reading in this video is titled, which is section 3, is titled The Kolkhoz Managerial Stratum and Its Placement in the General Social Structure. According to the kolkhoz statutes, the supreme directing organ was the General Assembly of Kolkhozniks. In theory, the General Assembly of Kolkhozniks could annul unjustified decisions by the chairman, vote for obligatory resolutions, adopt or modify the kolkhoz budget, and remove the chairman. In practice, the kolkhozniks could not exercise any of these rights, except in very exceptional cases, in particular when they were impelled to do so by the authorities at a higher level, Apart from such cases, kolkhozniks who took the risk of opposing the will of the, quote, chairman would appear to be, quote, suspect and, quote, rotten elements, and would be exposed to severe troubles and even sanctions. In actuality, the kolkhoz chairmen were, therefore, not subject to any control from below. In actuality, the kolkhoz chairmen were therefore not subject to any control from below. They were appointed from above. They were, quote, simple administrators, end quote, who often did not call the general assemblies and the, quote, control organs, end quote, or if so, only so as to have their decisions, quote, ratified. In popular language, they were often referred to as the, quote, kolkhoz directors, end quote. Their power was much more than that of the local Soviets, which usually went along with the measures they took. Their authority over the kolkhozniks, moreover, much exceeded that of the director of an enterprise over, quote, his workers, since the kolkhozniks depended on their managers not only during work, but during their daily life, for example, for the upkeep of their houses, the preservation or reduction of their individual plots, and even problems of food supply. However, management of the kolkhoz was not carried out by the kolkhoz's chairman alone, but by a managing stratum. Management of the kolkhoz was not carried out by the kolkhoz's chairman alone, but by a managing stratum, whose career depended on party and state decisions. The existence of this stratum limited the claims of the chairman to exercise the powers of a, quote, sole director, end quote. Because this stratum's members could review the, quote, decisions, end quote, of the chairman, invoking, quote, superior state interests, end quote. In this way, the state administrative nature of the kolkhoz was reinforced. The existence of a kolkhoz managerial stratum met other needs besides that of ensuring the, quote, supervision, end quote, of the kolkhoz chairman, for there were other means of, quote, supervising, end quote, the kolkhoz chairman. One of the functions of the kolkhoz was to transform agricultural work into a, quote, enterprise of industrial character. End quote. Developing a new division of labor and new styles of cultivation, increasing the use of mechanical and chemical techniques, quote, rationalizing, end quote, its operations, and, quote, improving its administration, end quote, with proper bookkeeping. This function of the kolkhoz required the presence of a variegated body of, quote, specialists, end quote. The, quote, specialists, end quote, performed quasi-managerial tasks and watched over the transformation of the conditions of production, so as to allow an increase of production and of, quote, profitability, end quote. Insofar as the cadres charged with these tasks succeeded in actually tackling them, Their activity tended to transform the kolkhoz into a, quote, state enterprise, end quote. Parenthesis, a form declared to be, quote, superior, end quote, to the kolkhoz form, end parenthesis. The second essential function performed by the, quote, collective farm, end quote, parenthesis, a function which predominated throughout the 1930s, end parenthesis, was to ensure at any price the satisfaction of the state's immediate needs for agricultural products, the latter to be obtained at the lowest possible monetary cost. To ensure at any price the satisfaction of the state's immediate needs for agricultural products, the agricultural products to be obtained at the lowest possible monetary cost. Above all, it was a question of maximizing the procurement of grain, and to that end of introducing in the, quote, collective farm, end quote, a, quote, factory despotism, end quote, at a time when the material basis and the ideological conditions necessary for a relatively, quote, flexible, end quote, exercise of the despotism were lacking. Hence the role played by naked repression in the operation of the kolkhoz and the multiplication of supervisory and control tasks assumed by the kolkhoz managerial stratum and by the, quote, little bosses, end quote, placed under its orders. Hence the role played by naked repression in the operation of the kolkhoz and the multiplication of supervisory and control tasks assumed by the kolkhoz managerial stratum and by the, quote, little bosses, end quote, placed under its orders. The increase of supervisory tasks thereby expressed the subordination of the kolkhoz cadres to the general demand for capital accumulation, which the departments of state were striving for. To cope with its many tasks, the kolkhoz managerial stratum took the form of a group that was complex and hierarchical. The kolkhoz managerial stratum included elements that were genuinely dominant, the nucleus of a new agricultural and rural bourgeoisie, and elements that were relatively dominated, forming an agricultural petite bourgeoisie. The lower ranks of the latter included kolkhozniks occupying more or less privileged positions. A detailed analysis of the personnel of the kolkhoz managerial stratum and of the kolkhoz managerial stratum's characteristics would require an excessively long treatment. The discussion will therefore be limited to certain general points. For a start, it should be noted that toward the end of the 1930s, the kolkhoz managerial stratum was still relatively small. At that time, there were about 240,000 kolkhozes. The latter, according to figures quoted in 1939 referring to 1937, had 582,000 kolkhoz chairmen, assistant chairmen, and managers of animal breeding farms. To these agricultural cadres must be added 80,000 agronomists and 96,000 other agricultural technical staff, parenthesis, but by no means all of these worked entirely within a kolkhoz, in parenthesis, making a total of 758,000 in these categories, which is a small figure for a kolkhoz population of more than 80 million. Footnote, see the report by Molotov to the 18th Party Congress. End footnote. To these cadres, who constituted the hierarchical summit of the kolkhoz strata, were added the intermediate cadres, mainly brigade and team leaders. Footnote. Until 1932, work was divided between kolkhozniks by the kolkhoz chairman, and workers were sent constantly from one job to another. A decree of February 4th, 1932, published in Izvestia February 5th, 1932, ordered a decentralization of management and the formation of permanent brigades. This organizational principle was reaffirmed in the statutes of the Agricultural Artel of 1935. A brigade consisted of 30 to 60 people and could be divided into teams. The brigadiers were appointed by the kolkhoz management and had to make regular reports. They were appointed for 2 or 3 years and, in principle, could be removed only with the agreement of the local representatives of the Agricultural Commissariat. Parenthesis. On these points, see C. Beanstalk, M. Schwartz, and A. Yugov's book, Management in Russian Industry and Agriculture, published in London in 1944. End footnote. Most of these intermediate cadres had no particular technical knowledge. As A. Art Union remarked, in its training, quote, the kolkhoz intelligentsia, and quote, it's hardly distinguished from the mass of kolkhozniks, of which in 1939 almost a quarter was completely illiterate, and only 3.7% had finished the 7-year school. The cadres therefore fulfilled essentially command, supervisory, and control functions, while there was a shortage of, quote, specialists. The cadres therefore fulfilled essentially command, supervisory, and control functions, while there was a shortage of, quote, specialists, end quote. Parenthesis, for example, of tractor drivers and agronomists, end parenthesis. Bear in mind the requirements of the large-scale mechanization that had been forecast for the kolkhozes. To the cadres entrusted with command and supervisory functions should be added those entrusted with administrative functions, mainly bookkeepers. However, the command function went to the kolkhoz chairmen, their deputies, and the brigade and team leaders, some of whom were in the kolkhoz council of administration. These command functions were combined, as we shall see, with those exercised by party and state organizations, for these organizations constantly intervened in kolkhoz activity. The totality of the operating conditions of the kolkhozes, their manner of administration, and the exactions that the state imposed on them determined the low level of kolkhozniks' incomes and the inequalities which influenced their distribution. That's the end of this section. Thank you so much for listening. The next section is titled The Incomes of Kolkhozniks and Kolkhoz Cadres.